I'm Andreas Enfeldt from dietdoctor.com, and I'm here with perhaps the world's foremost expert on paleo diets. Could that be true?
Well, that's awful flattering, Andreas, but I've been involved from the very beginning with this. I think there's a number of key people, and I think that I'm probably in that core of key people that have promoted this concept and continue to promote it.
Yeah, so your name is Lauren Cordain, and you're a professor and researcher in Paleolithic diets, among other things.
Pretty much. My research in the last 20 years is focused on diet and this evolutionary basis for human diet.
Yeah. So I was going to start asking you, what is a Paleolithic diet and why is it so popular today?
Well, Paleolithic stands for the Old Stone Age, and the Old Stone Age began with the invention of stone tools, and that happened about 2.5 million years ago, and it lasted up until the beginnings of the agricultural revolution, which was 10,000 years ago. And during that period, all humans were hunter-gatherers, and the food that they consumed was the food that they could forage, hunt, gather, or fish, and it was basically fresh food. Obviously, there was no processed foods or any foods that came about with the Neolithic and the Industrial Revolution. So what we try to do with the contemporary paleo diet is to try to mimic the food groups that our ancestral hunter-gatherers consumed, and with modern foods that are available at the supermarket. The only real caveat to that is, the only exception is that I think it's better if people can get grass-produced meats, beef, free-ranging chicken, and so forth. So those are superior to meat that has been produced in a grain produced in a feedlot. So that's pretty much the basis of the diet. And if you look at the food groups that our Stone Age ancestors didn't consume, they didn't eat cereal grains except as starvation foods occasionally. They certainly weren't staples. They didn't consume dairy products because they hadn't domesticated cows. And all of the processed foods that we eat now come from 4 major food groups: cereal grains, dairy products, vegetable oils, and refined sugars, and salt. And if you put those all together, you can call it a donut, a cookie, a pizza. You can call it anything you want, but it's basically the same 4 ingredients that are used in all sorts of processed foods. And most Americans and Europeans consume roughly 70% of their calories as those 4 food types. And so what we try to do is eliminate or severely reduce those foods and focus on real living foods like fresh fruits, fresh vegetables, nuts and seeds, and, as I mentioned, grass-produced meats. Seafood and fish are really the foundation of this diet.
So I find it fascinating. You write in your book, The Paleo Answer. I mean, this is all based on evolution, right? And which is probably the most powerful idea in biology. And some people have said that nothing in biology makes any sense except in the light of evolution. But even so, that's not what we base our nutritional guidelines on today. Official guidelines don't really care about evolution at all.
Well, I think you're right. I think that nutrition is a very young discipline in that it doesn't have an organizational template. Like if you look at cosmology, cosmology is how the universe formed, and we know that the orienting paradigm is the Big Bang Theory. And so in nutrition is applied biology. And so the most fundamental of all ideas in all of biology, and indeed nothing in biology makes sense except under the light of evolution. So that statement should be extended to nutrition, is that nothing in nutrition makes sense except under the light of evolution. Unfortunately, the nutritional community is either unaware of this or they haven't bought into it yet. But evolution through natural selection won't go away. It is the most powerful idea humans have ever created to help us understand biology. And so eventually it will become the de facto guiding template for nutrition. I'm 61 years old and I should live so long to see that occur. But I would predict that in 20, 30 years or so, The USDA guidelines will no longer be based on fallible human ideas, which we call the My Plate or the food pyramid. It'll be based on these kinds of ideas. And so the evolutionary basis for nutrition really didn't get going until 1985 with Boyd Eaton's famous paper in New England Journal. So what are we, 35 years down the road? And in another 35 years, hopefully it'll be fully integrated into nutrition. So we'll at least have the information. And I predict that this concept will be refined. It certainly should be refined as more randomized controlled trials are done and as we understand our biologies and our metabolism in a better manner. But the basic concept will never leave us, is that our genome was shaped by this ancestral environment, this Stone Age environment. And we are literally Stone Agers living in the Space Age. Now we have, some genetic adaptations that have occurred since the agricultural revolution, but genomic sweeps of populations from around the planet suggest that in the past 60,000 years, we're pretty much like we were 60,000 years ago, just as we left Africa. There's certain parts of our immune system that have changed fairly dramatically. Adult lactase persistence and some hemoglobinopathies come to mind, but for the most part, our basic biology is no different than humans that were living 60,000 years ago.
Right, and like you said, we're Stone Agers living in the Space Age. What kind of health implications does that have?
Well, if you look at the health issues that impact Westernized people, Europeans, Americans, people from all over the planet that now have embraced this Western culture of processed foods in supermarkets and so forth and have abandoned their traditional foods and activity patterns, we see very characteristic diseases, not the least of which is the metabolic syndrome. So obesity, the metabolic syndrome, and diseases of civilization, for instance, acne. Acne runs rampant in Europe. Virtually all teenagers ultimately get it, same way in America. We know that acne doesn't exist in traditional cultures consuming non-processed type foods that don't eat sugar and refined flours and vegetable oils and what have you.
So that's fascinating. That could mean that if we lived like our ancestors, there would be no acne.
Well, I think so. I think that we now have, I'm a scientist at a Division I research institution, so part of my job is to write scientific papers, to write grants, and to review scientific papers for other scientific journals. And so I'm privy to much of the dermatology literature that has to do with diet and acne, because the article that I wrote in the Archives of Dermatology in 2002 really opened up the diet acne debate after 30 years of being shut down. And so I just reviewed a paper from a South Korean group showing that high protein, low carb, low glycemic load diets improves acne symptoms. And they measured a number of end markers of inflammation and this and that and whatever that are used to kind of identify some of the inflammatory markers that we see with skin diseases like acne. And so they all improved. So we now have, I believe, 3 or 4 randomized controlled trials. And this information, once again, will not go away, is that because of the internet now, everybody can talk to everybody. So you can go online and have access to me instantaneously across the planet, and I to you. So secrets are no longer kept through scientific journals, is that the information flows very, very rapidly because of the internet. And I think that this whole idea of diet and acne is burgeoning. And again, I'm at the end of my career, but young people, young dermatologists who don't know the dogma of previous years that diet, quote unquote, had nothing to do with acne will now see the good science. They'll see the mechanisms behind it. And the upshot of it is that we will now have alternative treatments for teenagers and even young adults who have acne that aren't necessarily pharmaceutically based.
Right. I mean, acne is a big problem, obviously, for a lot of people, but paleo diets could help with a lot of other diseases that might be even bigger problems in society today, such as?
That's right, Andreas. And the skin is just one organ, and the skin is an external manifestation. So we see what's going on with the organ by looking at it on the outside. So it's very obvious that there's a disease. But disease most frequently doesn't manifest itself externally. Disease manifests itself internally. And so the diseases that are prevalent throughout the Western world, hypertension in the United States, if you reach your sixth decade, 75% of all Americans in their sixth decade are hypertensive. We don't see an age-related increase in blood